called circle graphs, all right? Now, I just want you to imagine, are you somebody that always likes things absolutely just perfect? Do you fuss over the details that sound like you? Maybe a job in if this sounds like you, then maybe a job in quality control is the place for you, right? So these are people that work to make sure that when you got businesses and they go and make stuff, they go and make stuff in such a way that the business doesn't lose money by wasting materials, okay? Now, sometimes it means that when you're that person, you're going to go and have graphs to kind of help us make sense of what's actually happening in the workplace. So they collect a bunch of numbers and then they use those numbers to kind of give themselves a visual representation of what's actually happening. Okay? Now, graphs are amazing. Now, have you ever heard of the concept that a picture is worth 1,000 words? Well, what that means is that using a picture allows us to make conclusions. And because every different person has a different way of saying what those conclusions are, it means that there are technically more than 1,000 words available for that representation. Okay? Now, this is definitely true when we take a look at a picture or a graph, right? Graphs literally give us lots of information, and based on that information, we can make conclusions, otherwise known as truths, about the situation that we're looking at. So let's have a look at the different kinds of graphs that we have for this lesson. All right, so let's look at this first, at this image here. There are 3 different kinds of graphs, okay? When you're looking at these 3 different kinds of graphs, we have one that's called a circle or a pie graph. We also have another one that is called a bar or a histogram. And then we also have this last one here. We call this one a line graph. Okay, and some people call these things called trend graphs. Anyway, now each of these have their own unique characteristics, and each of these unique characteristics help us understand how all this stuff works. So let's take a look at all these graphs in detail, okay? So today we're going to look at circle graphs. So the first thing we're looking at, when we look at a circle graph, the main concept of the circle graph is this. If you look at that circle, right? If you look at that circle, and I wanted you to describe it, I want you to pause the video and then try to describe what you see. And then start the video again, and then we'll continue. All right. So now, if I'm looking at this graph, right? This graph it's broken into 5 parts. Let's call it 5 slices. Some people call them wedges. And it's difficult to say for sure, but I think it might be. So each slice might be evenly cut. Okay, it might be evenly cut. We're not the same size. The blue might look a little bigger because that's the closest pieces to us. So blue might be bigger, might look bigger. Because it's closer to us. All right. Okay. Now, here's one of the things that I need you to remember. You're going to need these for when you get to grade 12. Here's the concept. If I know that a circle is 306, has 360 degrees in it, okay, it can be divided into a whole bunch of pieces in order to make it a whole circle, right? Okay, there we go. So that's the first concept. Now, let's take a look at dividing the circle. Now, let's say that I take a look at the circle and I divide that circle into 2 equal pieces, right? Then you would have something that looks like this, all right? And that's what would happen. And you'll notice that for each part of these things, I literally have different bits that are kind of emphasized. You'll notice the circles have 2 halves. Each half has 50%, and then there is a little legend that kind of shows you what the heck is going on. Okay, so let's go over the parts of our circle. So usually with a graph, there is a title. There is, so parts. So there's a title, and there are wedges. Let's call them wedges. And each wedge has a percent or a number that's attached to it. Okay, and each wedge can be different colors. And once you've done that, here's the last bit. There is a thing called a legend. Now the legend tells us what each color means, what each section represents. Now, if I was looking at this next circle here, here's what I could ask you. I could ask you to tell me or describe the circle. So if I asked you to describe the circle, you would literally say this. You'd say 75% of the circle is purple. Now, 75% is purple. Now, another way to represent that is you could have said 75 out of 100 is purple, right? And then, you could always break 75 into the lowest fraction and call it 3/4. So you remember we were doing ratios yesterday. It ties in. All right, and now we also have 25% for the second bit. So you'd say 25% is blue. Okay. And that is the same as saying 25 over 100, which is the same as saying 1/4. Okay, we could have said it's 1/4 blue, 3/4 blue. We could have said it's 75 out of 100 blue or 75%, right? All of those things could have been said to describe this circle right here. So now let's move on to these 2 more circle graphs. So this is where you guys are going to do a little practice, and then we will see if you actually know what the heck this is all about here. So pause the video, do this, do the description of these 2 circles, which I will provide for you online. And then once I get those from you, then you can move, then we'll move on to the next concept. Okay? All right.